Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Today we have a video on moral objectivism. This will be the first video in a three-part series. This is on an essay that I wrote to clarify exactly what the moral objectivist argument is that C.S. Lewis gives in his books, The Abolition of Man and Mere Christianity. The full title of the video is on screen, The Critique of Anthropological Moral Objectivism as the Only Legitimate Argument for Moral Objectivism. I would appreciate any feedback on my essay for those who are interested, so my email address will be in the description below. But let's get started. This video is about how right now we have two options as humans. We must choose one of the following as there are no other options. Option number one, moral objectivism. Option number two, moral subjectivism. I will briefly define these two and then explain the moral objectivist argument that C.S. Lewis makes from my own perspective. And finally, we will go over some things that I consider to be major issues with the moral subjectivist ideologies. This monograph is a direct result of the Hillsdale College Online Courses for the books Mere Christianity and The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. I highly recommend that everybody read those, and I will have the link in the description below for the Hillsdale College Online Course. And since I know some people won't watch the videos on moral objectivism or read the book Mere Christianity just because it's part of something about Christianity, I wanted to express what Lewis says in his books for those people who want to know about the only legitimate argument for moral objectivism that can possibly be made. Moral objectivism and subsequently moral subjectivism are defined as follows. Moral objectivism is the ideology that there are objectively true laws of nature constituting the essence of morality, just like there are true facts about the nature of math and science. This is sometimes called moral realism. Moral subjectivism is the ideology that there are no absolute laws of nature to determine whether something is right or wrong, just like there is no correct favorite color. This is sometimes called moral anti-realism. So anthropological moral objectivism is the only legitimate argument for moral objectivism because any argument for moral objectivism must prove all three of the propositions on screen. These propositions are covered in the video on good and evil in the Hillsdale Online College course. They are the essential elements of moral objectivism that C.S. Lewis demonstrates in the two books on screen. Mere Christianity is on the left, and The Abolition of Man is on the right. The first proposition is that moral value is objective because we have a sense organ to determine right from wrong called the conscience as a part of a natural moral law of nature. The second proposition is that moral value is universally held to be objective by humans. The third proposition is that we learn moral values and value measurement skills by practice, or in other words, by developing our conscience. To explain the first proposition, this argument is called anthropological moral objectivism by Hillsdale College because it posits moral innatism, something that is an innate part of the human being as objective as any other of the five senses. I will term this objective part of the human being that we all share our conscience. Lewis begins Mere Christianity by saying that we should study people who have an argument. We should watch them and catalog what we observe. This could be anyone at any time, but everyone has heard people quarreling. Sometimes it sounds funny, and sometimes it sounds merely unpleasant. But however it sounds, I believe that we can learn something very important from listening to the kinds of things that people say. They say things like, "How would you like it if anyone did the same thing to you? That's my seat. I was there first. Leave him alone. He isn't doing you any harm. Why should you butt in? Give me a bit of your orange. I gave you a bit of mine. Come on, you promised. People say things like this every day. Educated people, as well as uneducated, children, as well as grown ups. What's important to take note of is that the people who make these remarks are not merely saying that the other person's behavior simply does not please them. They are attempting to appeal to some kind of standard of behavior that they expect the other person to know about. And the other person very seldom replies, "To hell with your standard." The most common reaction is to see people try and make a claim that there is some kind of special reason in which there's an exception to the standard, in which the case is the situation. In the above quote, Lewis emphasizes that there is no way to have an argument with anyone without a common moral ground on which to argue with them. Just like a person cannot commit a foul in a sport unless there is a common standard in which to judge exactly what a foul is. Another example Lewis gives in Mere Christianity is that we can only know where New York is on the map if there is a common idea of what New York is. If things were as the moral subjectivists claim, and we can invent morality, it would be analogically no different than making up our own idea of what New York is. If we truly lived in a universe of moral subjectivism, then people arguing in the above mentioned situations would be no different than people arguing over the correct favorite color. If this really was the situation, there wouldn't be an argument at all, because all arguments in those examples above rely on common moral ground on which to make their argument. This is why we don't see people arguing over the correct favorite color, as there is no common ground on which to rely upon to make an argument. This common moral ground represents the self-evidence of morality. If nothing is morally self-evident, then nothing can be proven to be morally subjective or morally objective, because even moral subjectivists rely upon this self-evident common moral ground. The experiences of reality that create these stimuli of the moral value judgments are not created by humans. They are created by objective reality. This objective reality is the natural moral laws in action. Just like there is an objective reality, there is also objective morality. It's not something we invented, nor is it something we project out from our emotions. We must use an example to fully comprehend what Lewis and I mean by these statements about objective moral reality. For example, if someone were to say causing innocent people to suffer is good, or that rape is subjectively bad, that individual is showing a complete lack of moral development. Eventually, everyone must meet that self-evident bedrock of the good. You do what is good because it is good, and you avoid what is bad because it is bad. This is self-evident to those people who study themselves and everyone else. There is no need for another reason that moral objectivism and the good are a self-evident fact of our existence. Just like all other self-evident facts of our existence, this argument for moral objective ethics is part of a natural moral law that is discovered through reason. So in the same way our senses show us objective, actual reality, our conscience shows us the actual objective moral reality. This is why the argument is called anthropological moral objectivism. It's because it's an innate aspect of the human being to be able to discern the moral laws of nature by using reason. This is why we tell people to be reasonable when they are acting in a way that we think is immoral. It's exactly like the rules of math. If someone were to disagree that 2 plus 2 equals 4, it is not being mathematically educated, inventive, nor progressive. Similarly, the claim that morality is subjective and consequently rape is only subjectively bad is not educated, inventive, nor progressive. rape is objectively bad is analogous to how 2 plus 2 equals 4 as an objective fact discerned by reason. To clarify, this is an objective fact of human relationships that has an ontological correspondence for human relationships. How many squares do you need to measure to know that a square has 4 sides? Accordingly, how many people do you need to mistreat to know that you cannot build successful, healthy relationships by mistreating people? Before we move on to the second proposition, let's be very clear about this objective law of human nature, moral law, or rule of decent behavior that is discerned by reason. Lewis and I are not talking about a physical manifestation of this law in the universe outside of its impact on humans. A conscience cannot exist in a rock. Therefore, the only way we would find or discover this innate moral law would be through observing those things that a conscience affects. Just like if we wanted to study hunger, we would study it through those things that are hungry and not through those things we do not know contain any sense of hunger. Hunger has objective validity for everything that feels hungry, and this objective validity is not refuted if it doesn't exist in water, rocks, and empty space. All this argument needs to do to reach its burden of proof is to point out the aspects of reality we can observe, catalog, and experiment with to get our demonstrative evidence that humans have a conscience as an objective part of their being. This being would be the same thing as Heidegger's Dasein. To be clear, the conscience is not the law in of itself. It simply participates in and discerns the laws. Consequently, just like if there are any other laws of nature that are not being followed, there will be natural consequences. The perfect example of the natural consequence in this situation is given in Edgar Allan Poe's famous poem called The Telltale Heart. To briefly summarize the events of this poem, the narrator is living with an old man, and the old man has an eye that bothers the narrator. The narrator becomes so bothered by this eye that they plot to murder the old man. The narrator sneaks into this old man's room at night, watching and waiting for the right time to strike. Eventually, the narrator smothers the old man with the mattress, and they chop up the body and put the pieces under the floorboards to hide all the signs of the crime. The police respond to a call placed by a neighbor who heard a distressful scream, and the narrator invites the police to look around, confident that the police will not find any evidence of the murder. The police search the room and eventually sit right on top of the very hiding place of the dead body, yet they suspect nothing of the narrator's crime. The narrator, however, begins to hear a faint noise, and as the noise grows louder, the narrator hallucinates that it is a heartbeat of the old man coming from underneath the floorboards. This paranoia increases as the officers seem to pay no attention to the sound. Eventually, the narrator confesses to the police that they murdered the old man. This popular fictitious poem illustrates that the conscience is an objective part of our human experience that people cannot get away from, just like people cannot get away from hunger. People objectively have psychological disorders and nightmares as a natural response to violating these objective moral laws, while most people just feel bad when they violate the law and do something petty. All people must recognize that our moral value judgments do have an ontological correspondence when we interact with other humans. Therefore, objective morality is as much a part of the universe as hunger is a part of the universe. Here's a quote from Lewis. Because our approvals and disapprovals are thus recognitions of objective value or responses to objective order, therefore emotional states can be in harmony with reason or out of harmony with reason. No emotion is, in itself, a judgment. In that sense, all emotions and sentiments are logical, but they can be reasonable or unreasonable as they conform to reason or fail to conform. The heart never takes the place of the head, but it can and should act by obeying it. Hunger comes from the stomach and the brain working together. There is also an organ responsible for these moral value judgments in humans. The brain and heart working together makes these moral value judgments. This is the reason why, as we shall see in the next proposition, moral value is universally held to be objective across all cultures and time periods. And so, with that, we complete part 1 of the series. If you like this content, please remember to subscribe to the channel. And thank you for watching. I will see you next time with part 2, where we're going to cover the second proposition and the third proposition.